Okay, so picking up where we left off, what is absolutism? As we said before, an ethical absolutist is committed to the following claim. Moral principles can never be violated. There are no exceptions to moral rules. So, question arises, should we embrace this view? Should we reject this view? What reason do we have to be absolutists or not to be absolutists? One reason to reject absolutism is to observe that there are extreme cases in which the only way to prevent something really bad from happening, like disasters, catastrophes, is by violating a moral rule and performing an action that would normally be impermissible. The classic example, right, is the case in which we can save lives by getting information from a prisoner who knows the location of a bomb that will kill many people. And so if he refuses to cooperate, like if we try to get him to tell us where the bomb is and he refuses to tell us, the only way to get the information is by torturing him, suppose. So the consequentialist will argue that the rule against torture is not absolute, because in this case we get to make an exception to prevent catastrophe. Okay, so certain forms of consequentialism lead to this anti-absolutist view that at least some rules are not absolute, right? The rule against torture. Why? Because in this case, we get to make an exception to the rule because we can prevent a catastrophe. We can minimize harm. Now notice there's a sense in which, you know, the consequentialist is an absolutist in another sense, right? That we should always do what we can to minimize harm. But in this case, we can think of the consequentialist as developing an argument that leads to the conclusion that we get to make an exception to a particular moral rule. In this case, don't torture. Another reason to think that absolutism doesn't make any sense is that there do seem to be genuine conflicts between our moral principles. And so if that's the case, then at least one of them has to be violated in order to resolve the conflict, right? If there are genuine conflicts between our principles, then we have to violate one of them in order to resolve that conflict. So if at least one of our principles is not absolute, that suggests that none of them are. So that's an argument, again, against absolutism. But one reason to think that absolutism is the correct way to go is precisely that it gives us a way to resist the logic of consequentialism. So sometimes the logic of consequentialism leads us astray. It leads us to think that we get to do things that are awful because they would promote really good ends, right? That sometimes the end justifies the means. And if we take that reasoning seriously, that can lead us to do awful things to each other. So the absolutist has a way of resisting that logic, right? Contrary to that logic, for example, the absolutist can explain why it is not permissible to sacrifice one innocent person or violate the rights of an innocent person for the sake of the public good. That's something that speaks in favor of absolutism. So Schaefer-Landau actually considers the doctrine of double effect in this context of thinking about whether we should endorse absolutism or not, or whether absolutism is an attractive view or not. What is the doctrine of double effect? Well, provided that your goal is worthwhile, you are sometimes permitted to act in ways that foreseeably cause certain types of harm, though you must never intend to cause such harms. This is from page 226. So here we have the distinction between the intended and the foreseeable effects of one's actions. This is thought to be an important distinction for the absolutist. Sometimes our good actions have unintended bad effects that we can foresee. But since we do not intend those bad effects, we are not morally responsible for them, and the badness of the effects does not make our action wrong. Right? This is a kind of intuition behind the doctrine of double effect. Right? So the absolutist principle here is that we never get to form the intention to do harm, or we never get to intentionally harm another person for the sake of some good end. We are, however, sometimes permitted to act with good intentions in such a way that brings about unintended, though foreseeable harms. Right? This is the argument. So, by appealing to the doctrine of double effect, the absolutist can explain, for instance, why it is permissible for the trolley driver, in the example we talked about, to turn the trolley to save 5 lives. That's a good intention, which has the foreseeable but unintended bad effect of killing 1. That's permissible, but it's impermissible for the doctor to carve up his innocent patient, that's a bad intention with bad effects, in order to use the organs to save 5 lives. That's a good end. So both actions have the same result, saving 5 lives. But the doctrine of double effect can explain why we're permitted to do the one, turn the trolley, but we're not permitted to do the other, or the doctor is not permitted to carve up his innocent patient. Why? Because that involves an intentional harm, right? Forming the intention to harm someone. Whereas in the case of the trolley driver, he's not intending to harm someone. That's a foreseeable but unintended effect of his decision to save the 5 lives. Okay, that's the idea. The problem is that, as Schaefer-Landau points out, in other kinds of cases, it's very difficult to draw this distinction between intention and foresight in a satisfactory way. So, it's not clear that the doctrine of double effect really supports the absolutist intuition here. It's not clear that we can really defend the doctrine of double effect. And if we can't defend it, then it's hard to defend absolutism. It's hard to defend one aspect of the view. The moral absolutist is also committed to the idea that moral requirements only apply to what we do. And this is thought to be a benefit of the theory. It seems like we are morally responsible for what we do, not for what we allow to happen or what we fail to prevent from happening. So there are certain things that we are forbidden to do, right? That's the intuition, but it doesn't follow that we are required to do anything necessary to prevent those things from being done by others. And so that's a commitment of the absolutist, and it's based on what's called the doctrine of doing and allowing. So again, if we have reason to accept the doctrine of doing and allowing, then it looks like we have reason to accept moral absolutism. So what is the doctrine of doing and allowing? We'll turn to that in the next video. Okay.